Have you had an experience in your life where you were literally walking in the dark? And we talked about the storm moving in. It actually looks a little cloudy. It's amazing, even with all these lights, how it gets a little darker in here when the clouds come over. Have you had an experience like that, literally walking in the dark? Yeah, many of you know that my family has long been for generations in the cemetery business. A lovely business to get into. You know, they used to say people are dying to get into that business. I don't know. It's, come on. It's true. It's true story. I would have been fourth generation, you know this. So that means growing up, I had lots of childhood experiences in the cemetery of all things. And sometimes they were great and sometimes they weren't. Walking through the cemetery in the daylight, it's not so bad. Try it at night. I did. As a 5-year-old kid, my dad would often take me with him. That we would get these calls. It might be vandalism. It could be somebody breaking in. But we get these calls in the middle of the night, and my dad would have to go out and open the gates so the police could go in. And guess who he would take with him? A wonderful experience to get in the car with your dad at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning and head out in the darkness of the cemetery, exploring. Now let me tell you, when you're 5 years old and you're walking in the cemetery and it's dark, your mind begins to do a few things, right? You start to see some things. Maybe you see some shadows. Maybe you hear a couple of particular noises. It starts to distort your imagination, and that darkness becomes very, very scary. And I think that's because being in the dark is a universal fear. I think all human beings have this sense of being afraid of darkness. And mostly it's because we just can't see. Like Jerry said, in the darkness of a cave, when you can't see anything, it gets a little scary. We don't know the way. We don't know the way to go. We don't know what's going to happen next, which is exactly the sense of the people of God living in the area of the northern part of Israel, that northern Galilee area. They were having an experience of darkness in their lives. And Isaiah steps in to offer some hope. So would you open your Bibles to the Old Testament? We're looking at Isaiah. Well, it's Isaiah chapter 9, just the first 4 verses. And as you hear these, some of these words will sound a bit familiar to you. Isaiah says, "There will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali." Those are those northern areas of Israel. "But in the latter time, he will make glorious the way of the sea in the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You," speaking to God now, the prophet is saying, "you have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing the rewards of those labors. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulder, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian." May God bless the reading and the hearing of God's holy word. When you're in the darkness, it can conjure up all kinds of thoughts. It amplifies sounds. As I said at the beginning of this, walking through the cemetery, it begins to distort our imagination. And that's just an experience of darkness. The people of Israel, the people of God that were living in those two areas, those two tribes, Zebulun and Naphtali, those are those two tribes, and they're up in the northern part of Israel, up in that northern Galilee region, right toward the top, up there where Jesus' ministry went all the way up to about where those tribes, that was their territory. And they were scared, and they didn't have imaginative fears. They were real. They were based in reality. because the darkness was actually something they were experiencing, because they were a conquered people. You know, up there in the north, that's the border. Even today, it's very similar. The border of Syria and Lebanon, and even today you have issues, border issues. But back in those days, easily accessible. Often other nations would come in and conquer those tribes over and over again. They were experiencing what it was like to be subjected to the whims and demands of some other nation. So they're always being plundered. So there's poverty, there's hunger. They're living in this, it's the promised land, but for them, it seems like a land with no hope at all. Can you imagine? You know, when you're a conquered people in those days, I guess it's true today too, nothing is your own. You might have a good harvest. You might plant and be prepared to do the harvest, but the conquering foe comes in and says, no, we're going to take that for ourselves. We won. We're the winner. We'll take it. You might have property. The conquering nation would come in and say, well, that's fine, but now we own it. It belongs to us. Do you know in those times, a nation could come in and conquer an area like this, and if you had children, little children, they could take your children as slaves. Imagine that. We have no concept of this. This sounds so foreign to us, but it's not foreign to other areas of the world. Things like this still happen. It's a darkness. It's a dark time. And when this is happening to these two tribes, this prophet comes out, Isaiah, and here's what he says. He says, in all this land of darkness, all these things that you're experiencing, as bad as all this is, there's coming a light. A light is breaking in, and it's going to shine through this present darkness. All these things you're experiencing, the light is going to shine. There's going to be a light at the end of your dark tunnel life. You know what it's like to be in a tunnel, and you just want some light to come in. The prophet's saying, this is going to change. A light is breaking in. Now, the light of God's action, we talk about this in church all the time, but for these folks, they needed it demonstrated, and when it was demonstrated, they were able to recognize, and that's why the prophet says, you've multiplied the nations. That's the prophet's way of saying, God's pretty powerful. He can multiply nations. He can increase joy. Whatever he's doing with this light, there's some power, there's some action behind it. And that's what makes the words of Isaiah so important. Because we all have an inner need. This goes back to that fear of the dark. We have an inner need to live in the light. And it's more than just living in the light. We have an inner need to experience some kind of joy in our life, maybe an increased joy. Now, we say in church all the time, we are the people of God, we have faith, we give prayers, we sing hymns, we worship, we have this community, we do baptisms, we do all the parts of the church. But I think even for folks like us, we may say we live in God's presence, but if you're going to be really honest, we have to say it's not entirely true. And it's not always true. There are places in you and I, we're going to just be honest here, that we don't want the light to shine. We don't want God into that area. And so for most of us, we may attend church regularly, may semi-regularly. We may feel like, oh, you know, Pastor Joe, we recognize the presence of God. We know what that's like. We're okay. We're experiencing God's presence. We get this in a variety of ways. But the truth is we still struggle with minor monsters in the dark. And I think sometimes that's experienced by us as that denial of God's light in those little areas, whatever they are. We may be great on Sunday morning, but when we walk out the door, there may be some other areas that we've kind of denied God's light to even have a chance shining in there. It's possible, I think it's possible for church folk and for pastors to walk out of the light of God. Oh, did he say that? I did. We can walk out of it. We can keep attending church and not be living fully in the light of God. We can celebrate all the trappings of what we say it means to be a Christian without really experiencing that full transformative power in our lives. That's a hard word, but it's an honest word. It's a true word. What does that look like? I asked this at first service, and most people were pretty honest. So, how many of you, if you're in church, you have to be honest with this one. How many of you, when you were little, could be even still today, how many of you, when you were little, maybe thought there was some kind of monster in the dark under the bed? How many of you ever looked under your bed to see what was under there? Come on. Come on. I had to ask my family twice before they got honest about this. We're little kids, we're in the bed, and you kind of start to wonder, it's dark. I wonder if that's when their imagination goes crazy. Is there something under there? And we want to look. We want to be assured, whatever the reason. It's kind of a crazy thing to do if you think about it, because if there's something under there, the last thing you want to do is poke your head down there, right? So it's crazy, but we'll get a light or something, and we'll start to look up under it, and we'll see what's under there. We'll use that beam to illuminate a small area. You know why that's crazy? What would be the smartest thing to do? Turn on the whole light, right? Why fool with the little beam and trying to poke your head down? Turn the light, because then the whole room is illuminated. And if you're a little kid and you ever wondered something's under the bed and you turn on the whole light, it feels far more safe. It feels good and secure than just flashing a flashlight, poking your head under the bed. I think most of us need more than just a beam of light in the darkness. Beam of light is not bad. Light's great. When it's really dark, it takes very little to light up a dark room. But I don't want a kind of life where I have to depend on some faraway beacon shining, some faraway light point, and the rest of my life is all surrounded in darkness. What I'd rather do is like I was doing in my room. I'd rather go and turn the light on. I'd rather leave that darkness behind altogether and live fully in the light. And I think that's what God is suggesting that we do. Jesus doesn't just create a light point. It's so funny. We talk about Jesus as the light, and Jesus is represented by light, and sometimes all we need is that little beacon of light to get through. That's true. But I think if you just see Jesus as a small beacon of light, maybe that flashlight bit under the bed, if that's how your image of the light coming in, I don't think we do honor to the fullness and the power of Jesus' light in the world. Jesus pushes out the darkness altogether. And it's such a relief, when a morning like that comes. You've had a rough night, and the sun finally comes up, and it's light in your room, and that night is over. That's a wonderful experience. That's the kind of experience Jesus brings into our life. So here's the key. The light in Isaiah, the light he's talking about in this passage, is more than just being able to see. We can do that in lots of little ways. Pin lights, flashlights. It's more than being able to see. It's one thing for God to act. God acts all the time. It's another for the people of God, and that would include us today, to recognize it. That's the rub, isn't it? Recognizing it. Once there was there's a grandmother, and she was quite elderly, and she was pretty sick. Had a very serious illness. But even still, she wanted to celebrate Christmas, and so she invited her granddaughter over. It was Christmas time to spend some time with her, and they were setting some candles up in the room and lighting these candles. And finally, her granddaughter says, "Grandma, why do we light these candles?" And she says, "My dear, we light the candles to tell the darkness that we beg to differ." Now, somebody told me at the first service, people don't understand that cliche, begging to differ. Do we get begging to differ? It means we're not going to put up with it. We don't have to just take it. We're going to offer a counter opinion. We beg to differ. The grandmother's saying, we beg to differ with the darkness, so we light a candle. We're not just going to accept darkness into our life. You know, modern Israel is not a whole lot different than it was back in the times of Isaiah when he's writing these prophecies, when Naphtali and Zebulun were being overcome by all these folks pouring in. Again, those borders, they're pretty much very similar to what they were back in those days. And there are still nation states trying to take over. And that was happening back in the early 60s. Some of you remember that. The Syrian army was trying to push in on Israel, and they actually did. They actually took over some land, and they planted artillery. Now, when we were in Israel 2 years ago, we traveled up there right at that Syrian border. We were standing on the border looking out at Syria. And the guide was telling us how there was this big gun emplacement that was up there. And the people, the Jews living in that part of Israel, called it the monster from the north. It was a real monster. It was this giant artillery piece that they would fire shells into the communities in the Galilee. Now think about this. This is the Galilee. This is where Jesus once walked. They're shelling continually. They were doing this for many, many years. And finally, in the 1967 war, Israel fights back. Now, this is not a political statement. This is historical fact. Israel fights back, and they drove out the Syrian army. And that hill that they placed the gun on, and they were firing into people's homes, they captured the hill, and they destroyed the gun emplacement. And for me, what that seemed to represent is they were saying, we beg to differ with this darkness that keeps pushing in like it was pushing in on the people of God in Isaiah's time. We beg to differ with this. We're not just going to take the darkness. We beg to differ. And they got rid of that gun, and the shelling stopped forever. The people of Israel, when they're begging to differ against the darkness, that was their way of recognizing, too. They would say God was with them. They recognized God. They felt God was active. They felt like God was present, and they rejoiced. So for us, for you and I today, we could beg to differ. It might be a monster from the north, something huge, or it might be a minor monster under the bed, however you name it. The question is, how are we going to tell, if you choose to do this today, to tell the darkness that you beg to differ? The first part is, we're not working with a flashlight. You know, it's not, God doesn't say, take this little flashlight against the darkness. We're working with a beam of light from God. We have God on our side, and it's an immense light. There's a Presbyterian minister by the name of Reverend Dr. Howard Chapman. His parents were missionaries in Sierra Leone in West Africa. And so when he was a little kid, about 5 years old, he was with his parents, missionary parents. And in that area, it's very rural. It's not much development. And at night, it is extremely dark. It's just like Jerry talked about. It's so dark, you can't see anything. And so folks would carry, if they had one, lucky enough, would carry a flashlight. So one night he was walking with his mother, and his mother was explaining about the flashlight, that they don't need the flashlight because they're going to trip and stumble. They need the flashlight because of the deadly venomous snakes that come out at night to feed. Cobras and things like that would come out. So she says, we use that light to see the snakes. And so Chapman says that kind of freaked him out a little bit, to use his own words. And so he was a little kid, so he asked, Mom, can I have the flashlight? It's kind of like monster under the bed. Can I have the flashlight to keep me safe? She goes ahead, gives him the flashlight. He's flashing this thing everywhere, but on the trail. He's flashing around, looking in the bushes. He's looking for the snakes. And finally, his mother says, that's enough. Let me have the flashlight back. And she said, what were you looking for? He says, well, I was looking for the snakes. And she said, we're not looking for snakes with the light. We're looking at the path ahead. When we shine the light, if there's anything dangerous there, it will get scared and it will move away and we'll pass through safely. Now, most of us, I have a little prop here. Most of us, if we need a light or we're walking in the darkness, we usually shine our lights down at our feet, don't we? That's how it works. I have my little splunking light here, my little cave. Jerry, where are you? This is what you needed. If you had this, you wouldn't have been scared. You know, do you see this little thing? This little light? It lights your way. So we take these sometimes on our camping trips and we can see. And if you're 59 and a half years old, it's really helpful to work on little small parts and things because you can't see very well anymore. But these lights are great. But here's the thing. Look at this. The light goes where your head is pointed, correct? If you're looking down at your feet, you're not illuminating, there's no illumination of the path. It's kind of the point that the lady was talking about. We need to focus out forward. We have more than a pin light. We focus out forward because darkness doesn't like the light. The things that are in the darkness get scared and they push away. But we have to be facing out, facing down the path. Now, the other thing about the light that's really important, I like to watch these survivor shows, you know, where they put people in these survival situations, and there's a couple of them I like a lot. But in all of them, what they do, once they get water and food, the third thing that they always want, no matter what, is what? Say it loud. You're in church. You can yell. Fire. They want fire. Why do they want fire? Because there's a psychological effect of fire, and they talk about this sometimes, just having a fire. Because when the fire is lit, yes, it gives warmth, but it also drives the darkness away. So the campsite's illuminated. Part of that is practical. If there's animals, they're usually scared away. But it's that psychological security of having the light. And you can see these folks when they are trying to get a fire going, and they're doing it by rubbing sticks or sparking on flint, however they do it. When they finally get the fire lit, what do they experience? Relief, joy, thankfulness. Are they happy? They're very happy because now light has broken in to the darkness. They become overwhelmingly thankful. Here's the point. We have more than just a flashlight beam of light. Begging to differ, for you and I to beg to differ with the darkness means we have much more. We have more than a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think that's satisfactory. We have a light that pushes out in a great way. It illuminates everything, not just the step, not just a faraway point, but it illuminates the place where we can actually live. And we celebrate that, like celebrating a fire that brings light, a light large enough to drive out the darkness. And that's what I want. I don't know what I want more than just a moment or just a pin light. I'd like to live in the entirety of the light. And that's good news because God never gives up showing the light, even if we're not recognizing it. But I'm hoping today you'll take a risk and begin to recognize it a little bit deeper. Isaiah says, when you recognize what God's doing, you'll rejoice. When the people of God beg to differ with the darkness, recognizing what God's doing, they also recognize God's blessings. They are filled with joy. It says God multiplies the nations. We have a powerful God, multiplies the nations, multiplies joy. The illusion here is when you do a harvest. You know, when folks did a harvest, they were very happy. They celebrated. It was a great moment. And Isaiah says that's what you're supposed to feel like. When we drive out the darkness, when we beg to differ, it's like that psychological moment of the fire. Now, we do a lot of camping, and when we camp, sometimes our favorite thing, once we get the campsite set, is start collecting wood. We collect lots of wood. Tim, you'll love this. Tim loves to do this too. He collects lots of wood for the fire pit in the back. We love to pick because we want a big blazing fire. We collect that wood, we stack it just right, and then when darkness hits, what do? We light the fire. And it's so wonderful after a long day on the river just to sit around. The campsite is illuminated. We hear the crackle, snap of the fire, and there's something comforting and secure sitting around that fire. It's a rewarding time. And sometimes we just look at each other and go, wow, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for this experience. And that's what Isaiah says. It's kind of that, you got the harvest, you've reaped the harvest. So the people of God, your natural response is to feel joy. So, I want to close real quickly here. What do I want you to do today? Because I don't want you just to hear this. I want this to be meaningful for you. So, I'm going to invite you. I can't make you do this. Here's the invitation. I want you to pick one area of darkness. Maybe it's that place in you where the light of God's presence, for whatever reason, isn't shining. Maybe we didn't feel comfortable with that. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to beg to differ with that one darkness. Don't settle for that darkness in your life. Practical steps, a few sentences. I want you to beg to differ with your attitude. If you wear this light looking down all the time, the body posture alone is one of defeat, isn't it? Kind of moping around, trying to find our way in the dark. It's our attitude to face out, to face forward, to look forward. Don't settle for darkness in your spirit. Don't listen to the voices, those scary voices of fear that get distorted, just maybe become bigger than they really are. We scare away all the voices, all the monsters, minor and major ones, by claiming the light of Jesus Christ. And I close with this one statement from Isaiah, and we find it in the Gospels too, when referring to the coming of Jesus Christ, since we are in Epiphany. We claim the light of Christ as the light that has shone and is shining in the darkness. Because no matter how great that is for you, the darkness cannot overcome the light. So we beg to differ. Amen.